What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing a breakdown, reaction, and review of the second episode of HBO's Batman spin-off miniseries, The Penguin. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if for some reason you haven't gotten around to watching this episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time, let's get into it. The episode starts with Sophia in Arkham Asylum, and she's walking into the visiting area being escorted by Dr. Julian Rush. She sits down in front of the glass, and we see her brother Alberto on the other side. She looks relieved to see him. She presses her hand against the glass, and he does the same, but his finger is missing, that being the finger that was cut off when he was killed. Sophia makes mention of it, but Alberto ignores her, promising her that one day he'll get her out. And at that moment, a man appears behind Alberto, and as Sophia screams out to warn him, he's shot in the back, to Sophia's horror. Now at that point, we see Sophia sitting in Dr. Rush's office as she struggles to catch her breath. Dr. Rush explains to Sophia that she's safe, and he takes hold of her as she continues to hyperventilate. It was a little weird, but it's therapy. Okay. He finally is able to calm her by asking her if she sees the paintings on his walls and the items on his desk. He explains to her that she's not in Arkham anymore and reiterates that she's safe. She stares at Dr. Rush for a moment before springing to her feet and putting on her coat. Dr. Rush asks her what she saw, but she claims she has to go. Dr. Rush explains that he can help her. He explains again that she's safe, and she replies, "I'm not safe. I'm home." Cue title. And, look, I really like this sequence. You realize pretty early on that Sophia is dreaming because, of course, we know at this point that Alberto's dead. But the dream is supposed to be the writer's way of showing us that Sophia is truly haunted by her brother's death, that she's still not over it. I also thought the beginning of this episode had a lot of energy, and by starting it this way, featuring Sophia, it kind of sets the tone for an episode that will be as much about Sophia as it is about Oz, in my opinion. Now from there, we see our man Oz sitting in a car in the rain, drinking Pepto-Bismol, which tells me he's worried about something. And in the very next scene, we see exactly what he's concerned about because we watch him enter the visiting area at Blackgate Prison to find Salvatore Maroni and what looks like his entire family there. I don't know how you get that many visitors in jail, but okay. Now, Salvatore causes Oz, he accuses Oz of trying to force his hand to take the fall for him as it pertains to Alberto's death. Now, Oz explains to Sal that he's not trying to force his hand, he just saw an opportunity. He explains that the streets are talking and that he deserves the credit, that being Sal. Now, Sal explains that he could drop Oz's name to the Falcones and stop the war he's trying to start between the two families. Now, Oz sits at the table with Sal, noticing that he's wearing the ring that he left behind last episode, like he's already gloating. He tells him that he might as well lean in. Oz explains that the Falcones are distracted, that he has the inside track with Luca, the new Don. He goes on to reiterate that they can take the Falcones down, but that Sal has to do his part. Sal agrees to claim Alberto if Oz makes good on the drops he promised. He then introduces Ervad, one of his capos, to run point on the operation. We next see Oz in the warehouse, directing men to load a truck with the drops in question in barrels. In a voiceover, he continues to explain to Sal that the route of the Falcone's truck is a straight shot to Robbinsville, no highways, all neighborhoods, that they'll be using a FEMA truck as their cover, and that the drops will be sitting pretty inside. He explains that everyone in the lead car are patsies, that Sal's men should waste them all and get the drugs and some blood. We then cut back to Blackgate Prison as Oz tells Sal that he'll be in the follow car and that he shouldn't touch that one. He goes on to explain that he'll be there to make sure that the Maronis get what's theirs without a hitch, to which Ervad agrees. We cut back to the warehouse as Oz opens the door to get in the follow car and Johnny appears, telling Oz that he is to ride in the truck with the product. Now, Oz assures Johnny that he has everything all set. Johnny explains that they're in the middle of a gang war and that he should ride in the truck with the product. Oz explains that he's just doing what he was told, that it wasn't his idea to close up shop and move the product to Robbinsville in the first place. Johnny reminds Oz that the warehouse and the drops is supposed to be his operation, like he stated in the pilot episode, and that since it's his operation, that he needs to be on the truck. So Oz reluctantly gets in the truck. And this sequence of events is kind of a hallmark of kind of status quo TV writing and film writing. And, I'm not saying that as a diss. This is literally how you do it. You have Oz meet with the Maronis and tell them how easy taking these drugs from the Falcones is going to be. Then you have Johnny show up last minute and alter the plan as to how that will have to be achieved. So from there, we see the drugs being driven out of Gotham in the rain by way of city streets, just like Oz promised. And per the plan, the Maronis show up, weapons locked and loaded. Inside the truck, Ray, the driver, makes a corny joke about seagulls, which means he's absolutely about to get killed, right? Them's the rules. But after Ray's joke, Oz stands and makes a joke of his own about the mafia and the government as he moves to the back of the truck. Just then, the Maronis' car pulls even with the lead car, and it indeed opens fire. Ray is also shot, causing him to let go of the steering wheel. At that moment, Oz kills the other two men in the truck, probably because he knows he has to get out the truck as swiftly as possible before he accidentally gets shot, right? Anyway, the truck crashes into the lead car, and as Oz moves to exit the truck, Irvad opens the door, his gun already drawn. Oz explains that he has to drop his promise, at which point Ray calls him a traitor and raises his gun behind him. Irvad shoots Ray, but not before he gets shot himself. And Irvad is wounded. Now, Ray's dead body hits the steering wheel, and the FEMA truck begins moving again. Inside the truck, Oz struggles to keep his balance as the truck is again riddled with bullets. It eventually crashes again, this time into a barrier, and it comes to another stop. Now Oz gets up and exits the truck swiftly, shooting one of the Maronis' men in order to save Castillo's life as the untouched follow car shows up. And at that point, Oz and Castillo get into the follow car and the group speeds off. Now, as all this is going on, Call Me Irresponsible by Bobby Darin plays. Now this song was composed by Jimmy Van Heusen, with the lyrics written by Sammy Chan back in 1963. And it was originally sang by Frank Sinatra, and Bobby Darin didn't sing his rendition until 2 years later. Now, in 1988, just for some background, Sammy Cahn said during an interview with a freelance writer, Harlan Conti, in San Francisco, that the song was originally written for Fred Astaire, which makes sense, it sounds like that, to sing in the film Papa's Delicate Condition, in which Astaire was supposed to star. And Khan personally auditioned the song for Astaire's approval, which was ultimately given. However, Astaire's contractual obligations prevented him from making the film, and the role went to Jackie Gleason, who was the person who actually introduced the song. And the song did win an Academy Award for Best Original Song at the 36th Academy Awards held in 1964. And, the lyrics go, essentially, call me irresponsible, call me unreliable, throw in undependable too. Do my foolish alibis bore you? Well, I'm not too clever, I just adore you. Call me unpredictable. Tell me I'm impractical. Rainbows I'm inclined to pursue. Call me irresponsible. Yes, I'm reliable, but it's undeniably true. I'm irresponsibly mad for you. So as you can see, this song was chosen for these scenes for a couple reasons. Not only does it sound like exactly the kind of classic song that a classic mobster would like, but the lyrics actually describe how shady Oz is currently being to a T. So, there's that. Now, we also see in this group of scenes, again, that Oz is smart, able to think on his feet quickly and extremely well. And we even had Sophia make mention of the fact that Oz could talk his way out of anything back in episode 1. And we watch him do just that at the end of episode 1 when Sophia had him tied to that chair, naked. And here, Oz has to make quick decisions about when to play for the Maronis and when to be a company man. And he does it with near expert precision, though there's also some luck involved here, of course, because Lord knows he could have been shot inside that truck, especially with my man, Ray not dying immediately and pulling on him, but he wasn't. And again, this is Oz's superpower, his street smarts, and his uncanny luck. And again, the writers did a great job with this group of scenes because even though we know that Oz has plot armor, right, that will last the entirety of this miniseries, but we at least need the ride to be interesting enough to hold our attention for this episode and the 6 that will come after, which means there will need to be tension building by the episode by way of Oz almost getting killed or almost getting caught. And this is simply a continuation of that dynamic from last episode. Remember, in the pilot, it was Sophia who almost caught Oz as it pertained to the murder of her brother. And this episode, it will be someone else almost catching him over the hijacking of the drops on the truck. Surely. Anyway, next, we see Sophia entering the Falcone home as conversations are being had about the hijacking. And as she enters the room, she specifically hears Nick explaining that Castillo would be dead if it wasn't for Oz. She then makes a beeline for the other room where we see Oz arguing with Johnny as Luca sits there listening to the pair go back and forth. Oz explains that they were sitting ducks during the hijacking, that if it wasn't for him, more men would have died. Johnny explains that Oz let the Maronis get the drugs, that they walked away with the whole stash. Now Sophia interrupts, asking Johnny if the drugs are all he cares about. Sophia explains that they can get more product, but that she seems more concerned with the fact that the Maronis humiliated their family. She reminds everyone in the room that the Maronis killed her brother and shoved him in the trunk of a car like he was a piece of trash. She goes on to state that justice is all that matters in this case, and that that's what her brother deserves, to which Oz concurs. Sophia then asks why Alberto's killers aren't strung up all over the city. Johnny explains to Sophia that when the time is right, the Maronis will pay. Sophia explains that they couldn't have been working alone because they knew all about the route they were taking to Robbinsville. Sophia states that someone inside their own family must be helping them. Now, Johnny takes offense to the accusation, explaining that Sophia doesn't call the shots. Luca then interjects, demanding Johnny show Sophia some respect. Johnny apologizes, in patronizing fashion, of course, before Luca tells Johnny to put the word out that if anybody is caught selling their drops, that they'll answer for it. He then dismisses the meeting. Oz asks Luca if there's anything else he needs from him, and Luca responds simply, "You've done enough." As Oz leaves, Luca asks Sophia to stay behind. He tells Sophia that she's always had a nose for bullshit and that if there is a rat that they'll find him, but that the when and the how isn't up to her. Sophia asks if the when and the how is up to Luca because he's the boss. Luca explains to Sophia that he's willing to let her snide remarks slide because she's grieving. He explains that Alberto's funeral is tomorrow and that she should focus on laying him to rest, that he'll deal with the family business. Sophia glares at Luca before storming out of the room. Now, as she exits the room, Oz is waiting for her outside, and he explains that despite their differences that he's on her side. He reminds Sophia that he saved Castillo's life even after he helped her torture him last episode. He also tells Sophia that he believes her about there being an inside man and that he can ask around. He also tells her that he's here for whatever she needs. Sophia asks why he would do anything for her. Oz explains that it should be her at the head of the family instead of Luca, that she should be the new boss, and Sophia warns him to be careful of what he's saying out loud. Oz explains that Al is dead and that he loved him too, more than Johnny and Milos and Luca, and that Sophia should be careful that she isn't killed next because the higher-ups didn't like Al, and they don't like her either. He then explains that Sophia has a card to play in Al's drug shipment, that Al would have wanted to see her take over and keep his dream alive. Now, Sophia stares at Oz before asking sarcastically if he thinks he knows what's best for her. She asks him how he's any different than the rest of the guys. Sophia thinks it convenient that all of a sudden Oz is on her side. She thinks it desperate and tells Oz that she knows he's scrambling for whatever dignity he may have left, hoping that she will somehow save him, but that it's not going to happen because she doesn't owe him anything. Oz responds, claiming that it's him that owes her. And Sophia glares at him before walking away. She glares and scowls a lot. Now, the first scene in this group was put in place to do one thing and one thing only: introduce the idea that there's a rat, an inside man. In fact, that's the name of the episode. So that we can get to the meat and potatoes of the episode, that being flushing out said rat. We also see the tug of war that exists within the family, especially between Sophia and Johnny, but kind of with Luca too. They just plain don't like each other. And after everyone leaves, and we see that there's a rift between, like I said, Sophia and Luca as well. And once Sophia leaves the room with Luca and she and Oz talk, we understand that it's basically Sophia versus all the men, at least in her eyes. It feels like the only man she trusted was her brother, and that maybe because, growing up they were all each other had, or simply because she saw them as true equals. But it feels like the writers may be setting up Sophia to be the final boss for Oz to deal with as this miniseries comes to a close. And, I guess we'll find that out soon enough. Anyway, next we see Oz and Victor walking around town as he complains about being pushed out by the higher-ups. He explains that when Carmine was alive that he was his right hand, but that it seemed to mean nothing to them. Now, as they walk, Victor passes by posters of missing people, and he stops and he stares at them as though there might be people he knows. And Oz calls out to him, and Victor hurries to catch up. Now, they arrive at Oz's apartment, and he continues his rant. He explains that Sophia is uptight and that she's not going to stop until she's got someone's head on the platter for the death of her brother. Victor asks Oz what the plan is for that as he sets up food on the table. Oz explains that they can't kill her, but that if she wants an inside man, that he's going to give her one, because he has no chance of getting his hands on Al's shipment without her. That's why he's saying he can't kill her, because they need her to get to the shipment. Now, Oz chastises Victor about the food, claiming that he wanted no cilantro on the tacos, but there's clearly cilantro on the tacos. And then he explains that girls are on the way and that he should start picking, as in removing the cilantro from the tacos. So in these scenes, we see that Oz is still angry about the fact that he continues to be overlooked by the higher-ups in the Falcone family, and that he has a plan to frame someone in said family as the rat in order to save himself. So this is Oz playing a bunch of short games in order to win a very long one. He's trying to win quarters so that he can win the game, if you will. Now, from there, we see Sophia riding through town as she listens to a news report about the spike in crime post-flood in Gotham. The report also talks about the rolling power outages and that the mayor isn't going to step up to fix what ails the city. The report claims that the mayor let inmates out of Arkham Asylum, including the Hangman, which we know is Sophia's kind of moniker. Sophia's driver goes to change the station, but Sophia stops him. The report goes on to state that Sophia is a psycho and a serial killer, having killed 7 women, and that there have been many more. There may have been many more, as the car continues through the streets of Gotham. So, this scene was essentially a data dump, in my opinion, and it was put here simply to explain to us why Sophia is someone to be feared, right? We as the audience already knew she was in Arkham Asylum because we learned that in the pilot, but here we get to finally hear exactly what she may have done, which was kill at least 7 people, maybe even more. So, Sophia Falcone, a very credible threat, it turns out. Good to know, right? Now, back at Oz's apartment, Oz is getting dressed while Victor picks the cilantro out of the tacos. He asks Victor if he's ever heard of the Blue Heron. Victor says no. Oz explains that it was a Falcone hangout back in the day and that he was a bar back there. He tells him that one day a guy named Pinchy came in and told him that he was so impressed by the way he took care of everybody that he wanted him to be his driver, but that he didn't know how to drive. So Victor asks him what he did. Oz tells him that he took the job, that he stole an old Buick, and that he learned, all in the span of a weekend, and that was how he became Pinchy's driver. Victor asks what happened to Pinchy, and Oz explains that after a few months, Pinchy got caught talking to the feds and he was murdered, but that Carmine saw something in him, so he kept him around. Now, at that point, the door buzzer goes off. Oz opens the door, and it's Eve and some of her lady friends who all enter the apartment together. Now, this scene, strategically provides us with part of Oz's backstory. It tells us essentially how he got into the Falcone family. I also think that Victor is asking the questions that he's asking because he's trying to chart his own path forward, looking into his own future to see what might become of him now that he has cast his lot with Oz. And, when you're giving, exposition and backstory for a character through dialogue, you have to be careful to spread it out. You need to spread it out as much as you possibly can so that we're not listening to a 10-minute soliloquy about the story of Oz Cobblepot, right? So in this case, what we're just getting is little pieces, little bits and pieces dumped, as data dumps, as we move throughout the series. And I think that's a smart way to handle it. If you're not going to show us his past, for you to, you have to kind of, let us know his past by telling it to us. And so that's what's going on in this particular scene. Now, from there, we meet Detective Marcus Wise at a bar, hassling the bar back, it turns out, for drops. He asks him how much he has left, and the bar back replies, nothing. It's a goddamn drought out there. Detective Wise replies, you owe me, before the bar back responds, take it up with the Riddler. At that point, the bar back gives Detective Wise a beer and continues working. And at that point, Sophia approaches him and asks if he's having a rough night. Detective Wise seems uninterested in speaking with her, and he even tries to leave, but Castillo shows up and intimidates the detective into sticking around for the conversation. Sophia asks Detective Wise if he used to work for her father. Detective Wise claims that half the force worked for Carmine. Sophia goes on to claim that Detective Wise was particularly dependable, especially at finding snakes in the grass, until, that is, he became a drophead. Detective Wise seems insulted by the comment until Castillo offers him drops. Sophia asks the detective if he wants to do the drops right away, and she even gives him permission to do so, and he does. Sophia then explains that 4 hours prior to the Maronis jacked their transport, headed for Robbinsville, and that she needs to know how they got their route and the time. Detective Wise asks why she's coming to him and not her family, but then he immediately realizes that Sophia must suspect that it was an inside job. He tells her that he doesn't feel comfortable doing what she's asking, but then Castillo gives him a wad of cash, explaining that she'll need discretion, and Detective Wise agrees to see what he can dig up. Now, this scene simply moves the story forward by supplying us with the means by which Sophia plans to suss out the rat, right? It was already made clear that she wasn't going to trust Oz with that duty. She may even suspect Oz still at this point, though that hasn't been made unmistakably clear by the writers. But what is clear is that this man will be the one who delivers the next piece of the puzzle to Sophia, which will prompt her next move, ultimately. So next we see Oz hosting Victor, the ladies, and some of the lower level runners, and he talks about how the Maronis came at them and they held their own as Victor gets a text from someone named Graciela asking where he is and if he's okay. Oz goes on to state that they should save their anger because the Maronis started something, they don't know what. He then toasts to their friends who weren't so lucky to survive the jack move, and they all drink. Oz then approaches Victor and introduces him to a girl named Roxy, claiming that he's the guy who messed up the taco order. He goes on to explain that Roxy is a cam girl, which seems to excite Victor a little bit, to the point where Oz has to tell him to calm down because he can't afford her. He then leaves Victor to talk with Roxy, and he moves on to his bedroom, closing the door behind him. Meanwhile, Roxy and Victor continue their conversation. She asks where he's from. He stutters quite a bit before getting out that he's from Crown Point. Roxy explains that her cousin lived over there and that it's virtually a no man's land since the flood, that her cousin lost everything. She asks about Victor before asking how he knows Oz. He tells Roxy that he works for Oz, that he's his driver, which Roxy seems to find at least playfully interesting. Now, inside Oz's bedroom, we see him looking at the photos of Johnny and the woman in bed, as if he's thinking about what to do with them. Eve knocks on the door and enters, and she talks to him. He tells her it'll have to wait. But Eve accuses Oz of killing Alberto Francone, and she asks if that's why he needed her alibi. She explains to Oz that he's putting her and her girls at risk. Oz explains to Eve that she has nothing to be afraid of because he has a file on Johnny, and that once Luca sees it, he's going to take the fall for the whole thing. Now, Eve explains to Oz that the Falcone's underboss, that being Johnny, is untouchable. Oz explains to her that no one is untouchable. Now, Eve smartly explains that that would include him. Oz gets out of his chair and he sits down next to Eve, and he explains to her that she bet on the right horse. He tells her that he has plans to open another club, even swankier than the Iceberg Lounge. He tells her that he plans to use Eve's girls for the entertainment. He tells her that he plans to slip the pics of Johnny to Luca at the funeral tomorrow, and that it'll be baby blue skies after that. Eve looks at him before standing and straddling him, putting her arms around his neck. She explains to Oz that he's playing a very dangerous game, that she doesn't want Sophia Falcone knocking at her door. She explains that women like her have enough targets on their backs. Oz reassures Eve that he knows what he's doing. He reminds her that she's seen him through worse, that he's always come out the other side better than before. He tells Eve that there's nothing about Sophia Falcone that he can't handle before the pair share a kiss. Now, this group of scenes worked well, I thought. The dialogue, again, smartly crafted and acted well, performed extremely well. These scenes simply advance the plot of the story by explaining the next part of Oz's master plan, setting up Johnny as his fall guy by way of essentially showing Luca that he's been sleeping with his wife. Which, of course, we know won't go down quite the way Oz thinks because, well, that's where the drama lies, right? In Oz making the plan, having to alter said plan, just like he had to do with the hijacking of the truck. The last of these scenes is also a preview of the potential confrontation between Sophia and Eve, maybe, before this thing is done. Now, from there, we see Sophia waking violently from her sleep, wearing pajamas, no doubt having just woken up from another nightmare. She opens the double door leading into what appears to be her bedroom, which means she's been sleeping in her walk-in closet, right? Now, as the light hits her, we see that there are scratches all over her neck. And as she enters the bathroom and turns on the sink, we see blood under her fingernails, which means she's been scratching herself in her sleep. She washes her hands vigorously before checking out the scratch marks in the mirror. And look, here, it kind of makes sense that Sophia might sleep in her closet given the fact that she's recently been released from Arkham Asylum. Maybe she's not yet used to sleeping in a nice bed, and maybe she's uncomfortable with the big open space that is her bedroom. So all this scene, makes sense as it pertains to her maybe suffering from PTSD of some kind, and is just another layer to the character that is Sophia Falcone. A nice touch by the writers here. Now, from there, we see both Eve and Oz getting dressed. Eve is counting money, telling Oz that he gave her way too much, just as Oz takes a one-way phone call explaining to whoever it is on the other line that he'll be right there. Eve asks if everything is okay. Oz replies, yeah, it's just work. Eve kisses Oz one last time before exiting the room as Oz stands there, seemingly deep in thought. And again, this scene is just kind of advancing the plot, easy peasy. There are those scenes that you put to just kind of make sure that your episode makes time and kind of is the next progression of whatever came before. That's simply what this scene is. No muss, no fuss. So next, Oz and Victor arrive at his mother's house to find her dressed in a sequined gown, right? Ready to go to the prom. As Oz questions a man named Caesar, the landlord, Victor asks his mother if he needs anything. And she wonders aloud why everybody keeps asking her that. Now, the landlord claims he found Oz's mother across the street, confused and without a coat. She told him that she was late for Mass, but she didn't realize that it wasn't Sunday. The landlord explains to Oz that his mother's dementia is getting worse. Oz explains to Caesar that he doesn't pay him for his medical advice. He then counts off $200 and he gives it to Caesar before demanding that he keep a better eye on her, before having Victor show him out. Now, as Caesar leaves, he looks at Victor and simply tells him in Spanish to be careful. Oz then puts on a record, Tears and Laughter by Dinah Washington, and he and his mother share a dance. She then reminds Oz that he promised her a better life. She explains that she doesn't want to be cooped up in her shitty house no more, right? Her words. She explains that, she won't be here forever. Oz remarks that none of them will, but that she needs to be patient. She replies, tell that to my headstone. Oz promises that he's working on it. She then gets, teary-eyed and asks, if my sons are nothing, then what am I? At that moment, Victor reminds Oz that the funeral is starting, and his mother tells him to go. But as he leaves, she calls out to him, and he replies, I know, Ma, I won't let you down. And then he and Victor leave the house. Now, this scene was heartwarming, as are all the scenes between Oz and his mother so far. And here we see maybe the biggest reason why Oz is taking all the risks that he's taking, because he feels for some reason that he owes it to his mother, whom he's promised a better life. And we can see that she leans on him a bit in order to make sure he delivers on that promise. You can see that he truly cares about his mother. And I guess it will remain to be seen just how much Mrs. Oz is willing to have her son risk in order to have the life that she feels like she deserves. But that seems to be something that we'll certainly be keeping our eyes on as the series continues. Now, from there, we see Oz and Victor arrive at Alberto's funeral. Now, Victor parks the car, and Oz has to hurry inside, having essentially missed the service. There are protesters outside the church, and as Oz walks up, he sees Luca and his wife exiting amid all the chaos. Oz calls out to Luca, claiming that he has something that he wants him to see, but doesn't have a chance to give Luca the envelope as he and his wife hurry and get into their car. He then looks inside the church, and he sees Sophia, having a cigarette. So Oz enters the cathedral and he approaches Sophia and he asks if she's avoiding the crowd. Now, Sophia explains that she needed a minute away from all the spectacle. Oz claims there's a lot of ass kissing going on, but that it was a real nice service. Now, Sophia replies, yeah, I didn't see you in there. Oz responds, didn't know you were looking. He tells Sophia that he was in the back thinking about how much Al would have hated everything that was going on. Sophia seems to agree, stating that he would have left early and found a better party, and the pair share a little chuckle. Oz then tells Sophia that they didn't have a service for his brothers, that his mother didn't want to deal with all the pity. He tells Sophia that his mom wouldn't get out of bed for weeks, that he tried everything but nothing took. Oz continues telling Sophia that one day his mother came to him out of the blue all dolled up to go out to a jazz club, that it was his first time ever hearing live music, and that they danced all night. Sophia seems surprised. Oz explains that that was how they decided to celebrate them, and that Jack and Benny, I'm assuming those are the names of his brothers, would have loved it. He explains that after that, his mother got out of bed regularly, she ultimately went back to work, and she took care of him. Sophia asks Oz what he thinks it was that changed for her. Oz claims that he'd like to think it was him, but that he doesn't know, that his mother died a few years back and that he never asked. He goes on to explain to Sophia that she needs to be careful with the pain of things like this, that they'll eat you alive if you let it. He tells Sophia that it's a hell of a lot more fun to dance. Now, at that moment, Castillo approaches and tells Sophia that there's a call for her and that they should get to the house. Oz then explains that he meant what he said before, that being about him being on her side and that if she needs anything to just ask. And then we see Sophia walk away with Castillo, but before they disappear from Oz's sight, we can hear Castillo whisper to Sophia that the detective says he has something. Oz then gets a text from an unknown number saying that they need to meet. Now, I love the monologue in this scene. I thought, again, it was extremely well written, extremely well performed. But it also gives us another example of what a smooth talker Oz can be, using what sounds like could be the truth about his brothers dying young and how it affected his mother to both comfort Sophia in a time of need, making her maybe a little less likely to see him as an enemy and more likely to see him as a friend, and to cover up the fact that his mother is indeed still alive, trying to minimize the chance of someone using her to get to him should the shit hit the proverbial fan, right? Now, this leads me to believe that at some point someone will find out that Oz's mother is still alive, maybe by capturing and torturing Victor, or by simply tailing Oz to her house. And that may be a sacrifice that Oz ultimately has to make in order to achieve the goal of taking over Gotham before this series is done. I guess we'll find out soon enough. Anyway, from there, we see the Falcones arriving at the mansion, and we see that Detective Drophead has captured Ervad, Sal Maroni's capo. And he presents him to Sophia and Castillo outside the home, explaining who he is and that he was one of the Maronis who lifted the Falcone's drops. He has him sedated and explains that he will perk up once the morphine wears off. He's also in a hospital gown, so we assume that he was taken from some place where he was getting medical treatment from being shot. Sophia asks what they're supposed to do with him at her brother's memorial. Detective Wise replies, "You said you wanted answers. I brought you answers." Sophia approaches the vehicle and yanks the morphine drip out of Ervad's arm before telling Castillo to take him into the basement quietly and to find her when he wakes up. Now, next we see Oz sitting in what looks like a club with the Maroni family, and this is likely who it was that texted him earlier. And Nadia accuses Oz, of inflating his position within the Falcone family, claiming that he had the inside track with Luca, but that the Falcones have snatched one of their men out of the hospital without so much as a word of warning from him. Now, Oz explains that the move wasn't made by Luca, that he doesn't tie his shoes without looking both ways, that this has to be Sophia acting on her own. Now, Nadia doesn't seem to care about that, claiming that a Falcone is a Falcone as far as she's concerned. She explains to Oz that if he doesn't know all of their movements, that he has no value to them. She then tells Oz that he broke his word and that is not something her family tolerates, that is how they've survived to this point. Now, at that point, the men with Nadia take hold of Oz, and one of them takes out a knife. Oz pleads for them to wait, asking for him to check his jacket pocket. They do, and they find the envelope containing the photos of Johnny Vitti and Luca's wife. He tells Nadia that the pair have been doing it for years, and that he has all kind of dirt on the Falcones, that they can use it to squeeze the Falcones one by one. Nadia explains that she wants her man back. Oz tells Nadia to give him his name and that he'll find him. Nadia tells him that it's Irvad, that he met him when he was back at Blackgate, and that he should hurry because if the Falcons get him to talk, he'll have a lot to say about Oz. And so, the one problem that I have with this is that, Irvad was apparently taken from a hospital. But anybody who knows how gunshot wounds in hospitals work, mobsters wouldn't take their wounded to a hospital because gunshot wounds get reported to the police. Though I suppose the family may have the police, on lockdown. So, okay, I'll leave that alone, right? But we do have our sort of episode finale set up with Oz having to storm the castle, if you will, in order to rescue Irvad before he can drop a dime on him to the Falcons, right? So, next we see the Falcons hosting people in their home for Sophia's brother's memorial. Now, Sophia enters the dining area and people seem afraid of her. They're avoiding her, right? And you can hear whispers and see people leaving the room. And in response, Sophia begins gorging herself on the food in front of everybody, even eating with her hands, right? And this is the second time we've seen her do this. She did this again when she was out with Oz having dinner. It's almost like whenever people are like paying, attention to her and she feels like she's being like watched or judged or whatever, she eats like a crazy person, like with no home training, right? So this is maybe part of her kind of process of just kind of dealing with having been locked up, right? And so, as she's gorging herself on this food, this just makes people whisper even more and leave the room even more, right? And, as this is happening, Oz and Victor arrive at the memorial. And Oz tells Victor that they could be driving to their deaths. So Victor asks, of course, if they should turn around. Oz tells him that the only way out of this is through. He explains that Nadia took the pictures, but that Vitti is still their mark. He tells Victor to look for a red Mercedes and that he is to plant the jewels in Vitti's car while he finds Irvad. That there's only really one place that he could be. And the jewels he's speaking of, again, are the jewels he got from the Iceberg Lounge in the pilot episode before Alberto took them from him and he took them back from him after he killed him. Now, Victor seems nervous and he tells Oz that he has questions. Oz explains that if they pull this off, that Vitti will take the fall for Alberto and for the Drops heist, and that they'll be one step closer to the top. He insists that they're not just going to walk away out of fear. And Victor agrees. Oz asks Victor if he can feel his heart beating, and Victor says yes. And Oz replies, "Let's keep it that way, huh?" as he exits the vehicle. Now back inside the house, Sophia makes a call to Castillo asking what Irvad is saying. Castillo tells her that he's still out cold. Meanwhile, Oz waddles through the house, no doubt looking for Irvad. And he eventually stumbles upon Castillo talking to Sophia, but he leaves before he's noticed. He then enters another room and approaches Milos and Johnny. He tells them to keep talking, that he already knows that one of the scumbags who shot at him is in the basement. Now, of course, Johnny and Milos are confused. But Oz goes on to lament the fact that he's been in the family for years and that they trust one of Sophia's guys over him. And then he just walks away, right? And this, of course, sends Milos and Johnny on the hunt to find out what's going on. Now, Sophia enters a room and she sees people watching old videos of Alberto. And this triggers her, so she exits the room and she grabs a drink from a nearby waiter's tray. She texts Castillo again before being approached by Carla Vitti, her cousin. And she claims that it's good to see her and that she likes her dress, that she always had great style. She then asks Sophia if she remembers all their wild nights at Lake Como, getting drunk and hanging out with all those horny Italian boys. Sophia says that she remembers getting into trouble for all that. She then tells Sophia that she still goes to Italy every summer, that they should plan a girls' trip together. And Sophia remarks that a girls' trip could be fun. Now, just then, Gia, Carla's daughter, approaches and is introduced to Sophia. Carla clutches her daughter closely, which seems to irritate Sophia. And Sophia remarks that Gia is very pretty, but that she has a barrette that's loose. Carla quickly says to Sophia that she'll get it, but Sophia insists. She fixes the barrette and then tells Carla that Gia is a real cutie and that she should make sure she keeps her protected, that it might not end well for her, being a woman in the Falcone family and all. And then she walks away. As she does, Johnny calls out to her, telling her that Luca wants to see her. Now, outside the house, Victor is attempting to put the stolen jewels inside Johnny's car, as per Oz's plan, but he's caught by one of the security guards who asks if he's trying to steal something out of the car. He then asks Victor what's in the bag, and at that moment, more men come out of the house and they all chase Victor towards the street. Meanwhile, inside the house, Milos and Castillo go to meet with Luca as he berates Castillo for trying to keep the kidnapping of Ervad from the family. Once they leave, Oz comes in behind them and he enters the basement where Ervad is being kept to find him cuffed to the boiler, still half asleep, groggy from, all the morphine. Now he slaps Ervad awake and he wakes him just enough to explain that Nadia sent him, but that he can't just walk him out of the mansion, that he'll have to do something first. He explains that Sophia is going to eventually ask him if he's been working with someone and that he needs to say the name Johnny Vitti, that it was him who killed Alberto. He explains that if he does that he'll help him. And though Ervad is still loopy from all the morphine, he agrees. Now at that moment, Oz gets a call from Victor and explains that he failed to put the Jews in Johnny's car, and he asks Oz what to do next. As Oz ponders his next move, Ervad wakes up and reiterates that he's willing to say Johnny's name. Oz explains that the plan has changed and that he has to give Lucas something solid or they'll be looking at him, and that he can't have that. Oz then takes out a knife and he kills Ervad before cleaning off the knife with a nearby rag and putting the knife back in his pocket and exiting the basement. Now, as Oz wanders through the house looking for the others, Luca, Sophia, and the rest of the higher-ups go down to the basement and they find Ervad dead, still cuffed to the boiler. Now, upon seeing the dead body, Sophia turns to Luca and she says, "I warned you." Luca then turns to one of his men and demands to see everyone from the drops transport. He tells him that no one leaves the house, and then they all exit the room. Now, a few moments later, Oz is corralled by one of Luca's men and taken into the dining room where more of Luca's men are searching everyone for weapons, claiming that they're looking for a knife, that being the knife that is indeed inside Oz's pocket, the knife that killed Ervad. Now, Oz reaches into his pocket and he takes the knife out, hiding it in his sleeve as the search continues. And as Johnny is brought in, Oz accuses him out loud of being the rat, claiming that he meant to send them to their deaths during the drops transport. He asks Johnny what the Maronis gave him. Johnny tells Oz to watch his mouth. Oz then calls him a dirty rat out loud in front of everyone, and the two begin to fight. Now, Castillo and others break up the fight between Oz and Johnny before Luca demands that everyone get back into line. He tells the group that one of them is a traitor, that they've been feeding information to the enemy, and that it ends tonight. At that moment, one of Luca's men finds the knife on Castillo. Now, of course, Castillo denies being the rat, but Sophia doesn't believe him. In fact, she becomes extremely angry. And Castillo continues to deny the allegations as Sophia asks for a gun. And finally, Luca shoots Castillo dead as Oz looks on, and then he walks out of the room. Now, in the next scene, we see Sophia arguing with Luca, explaining that Castillo was hers to kill for Alberto. Luca explains that he made the call. He then suggests that Sophia leave Gotham, which seems to surprise her. He explains that they need to do what's best for her, that she should go to Italy, that it's beautiful this time of year. He reminds her of the summer she spent on Lake Como. Remember, her cousin just did the same thing. And after taking a moment to think, Sophia agrees to go, claiming that she could use the time away. Luca reiterates that it would be good for her before kissing her on the cheek and dismissing her as Johnny and Milos enter the room, closing the door behind them. Now, this group of scenes was pretty exciting, and engaging, enthralling, if you will, right? We watch Oz again thinking on his feet, moving the pieces around the chessboard, changing the plan moment by moment as things unfolded before him. And I say again, his street smarts is his superpower, right? He's learned to use the fact that people around him don't expect much from him to place himself in position to take from them exactly what he wants in the moment, a little piece at a time, right? He's the master of the small move, right? The great manipulator. And though he's certainly not afraid to get bloody, you see it's a last resort for him because he can make people move by simply talking. We saw in these scenes that Luca is trying to ship Sophia off to Italy, Lake Como to be exact, and that maybe that's what the conversation with Carla was all about to begin with, trying to get her to go away, which means Carla was in on the plan to remove her. But we also saw that Carla is scared of Sophia. When her daughter showed up, the whole conversation changed because she was scared to let Sophia near her kid, probably because of the things she's heard in the media about Sophia being a serial killer of women and all, right? Anyway, next we see Oz and Victor burying bodies in the woods. He complains that Johnny is having him clean up the mess that was made, that being the burying of the bodies, even though it's Victor who's doing all the work, you know what I mean? He explains that it's supposed to be him in that grave that Victor's digging and not the two schmucks, excuse me. Victor reaches out for Oz to help him out of the hole, but instead Oz pushes him back down into it, which seems to surprise Victor. And Oz tells him to lay down next to the bodies. Victor seems confused, but Oz yells this time, again, demanding that he lay down. He asks Victor how it feels. He tells him not to close his eyes. He tells him to look at the dead bodies. He reminds him that this is what will happen if he chokes again. He explains that death is a one-way street and that he got close to getting popped today because Victor fucked up. He explains that he had to do a lot of work to walk out of the situation that he was in. Now, Victor apologizes, but Oz doesn't necessarily accept it. He tells Victor that if he wants to survive, that he has to adapt, that he has to think on his feet, otherwise he'll be dead. He explains that whatever Carmine asked him to do back in the day, he delivered on every single time. He asks Victor if he understands. Victor says yes, and then Oz helps him out of the hole. Oz tells Victor that there's no playbook for this, that he saw something in him, but that maybe he was wrong, that maybe he's just not cut out for this life. And just then, Oz gets a call from Sophia. He tells Victor to cover the bodies before answering. It's a brief one-way call, so we don't know what exactly is said, but Victor is shoveling dirt on the bodies as Oz is having this brief conversation. So, look, we see in this episode that Victor has finally dropped the ball in a major way, right? I mean, we've seen him make small mistakes in the pilot, and small mistakes here in this episode, like getting cilantro on the tacos when Oz had clearly stated that he didn't want cilantro on the tacos, right? And he's proven that maybe he's not quite ready for prime time just yet. But it'll be interesting to see whether that starts to change as the series goes on, or whether Victor will be reunited with whoever Graciela is, and maybe he tries to get out of the game. Either way, his character remains intriguing 2 episodes in. Now from there, we see Sophia in the Falcone family's mausoleum. It looks like maybe under the church. Oz shows up and Sophia explains that Castillo killed her brother. A man that she trusted was working with the Maronis. She asks Oz why. For what? Oz shows Sophia the jewels. She remarks that they were in Castillo's apartment, that her brother went to get them the night he died, that they were supposed to be an investment in their future, in the new drug. She explains that they were going to run the family together. She goes on to state that Alberto was taken from her and that she refuses to let the old men in her family push her aside again like she's nothing, so that now she's going to take from them and force them to their knees in the process. Then she looks over at Oz and she laughs before continuing, "This should be fun. What do you say, Oz? You in?" And Oz simply smirks before he replies, "Let's dance." And that's where we cut to black. So look, this scene was interesting because it confirms that Sophia isn't going anywhere. I mean, none of us thought she would, right? We all kind of knew she was going to be a staple in this thing moving forward. Despite being shooed away by the higher-ups, right? We also find out that the jewels that Oz found in the pilot were actually in Castillo's apartment, which means that he was the one who originally had dirt on Johnny. And I wonder what his plan was before Oz got in the way and kind of mucked everything up, right? And we see here that the main goal of this episode was to push Sophia and Oz together. So this is going to be Oz's way forward, right? To partner with Sophia and take down the old boys club. But I still think eventually that Oz and Sophia will fracture and they'll have to square off for complete control of the family. Most likely because at some point she'll figure out that her initial suspicions about Oz were correct, that it was actually him who killed Alberto, and that's the hook, right? That's the thing that's going to keep you watching from episode to episode to episode. You want to know what happens when Sophia finds out what actually happened, right? What happens when that comes to pass? And, and make no mistake, that absolutely has to come to pass in order for this series to be a narrative success, right? It's kind of like if you think about, say, a show like Dexter, right? Where Deb works for the cops and Dexter works for the cops, but he's serial killing people, right? There comes a point in time where Deb absolutely has to find out that Dexter's doing that. That's the reason why people come back and watch episode after episode after episode. So here, Sophia's going to have to find out that Oz was the one who killed her brother. Or else the show is just going to be a narrative failure, no matter what else goes down. Now, I would give this episode, again, a 95% or 9.5 if you're thinking IMDb score, right? The first 2 episodes have absolutely flown by, right? Which is a pretty good indication that the show is really engaging, right? You're not sitting there halfway through the show going, is this thing over yet, right? And I find myself with high hopes for this series, especially now that we're 25% the way through this story already. The writing here has been exemplary so far, with only a few lines of dialogue that I had issues with in these past 2 episodes. The acting, of course, is amazing, and Kristen Milioti, really shined in this episode. Now, as I look to where the story is headed, based on what I've already seen, I'm really excited to watch all of these things actually play out, right? All of the character arcs and even the story arc as well. I'm really excited, even more excited, if you will, that it seems like we finally have an HBO show that's indeed worthy of appointment viewing. But what do you guys think? Did you like the second episode of The Penguin? What was your favorite scene in the story? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd really appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themadScreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.